When we talk about AI, right, when artificial intelligence, we tend to think about it as a synthetic version of human intelligence. When it comes to education, education is not a means of production in the traditional sense. When you look at institutions of learning, there are a certain kind of social relations that operate within institutions of learning. So they are very keen on making sure that the students prosper and the students satisfy their learning outcomes and so on. When we talk about AI, right, I mean artificial intelligence, we tend to think about it as a synthetic version of human intelligence. We tend to think of it as if the machine is acting as if it is a human. But another way to look at it is as an advanced form of automation, advanced form of technological automation. And where does automation come from? Where does the impetus towards automation come from? The impetus towards automation in the industry comes from in production industry, for example, comes from the need to cheapen the cost of production and to increase the amount of commodities that are produced. Okay, so and that might be okay when it aligns with forces of production, means of production in various forms and so on. But when it comes to education, education is not a means of production in the traditional sense, in the traditional industrial sense. For example, I'll just quickly speech around 4 months after the Indian independence, after the success of the Indian independence movement. So he talks about the role of universities. I'll just start the quote. So a university stands for humanism, for tolerance, for reason, for progress, for the adventure of ideas and the search for truth. It stands for the onward march of the human race towards even higher objectives. If the universities discharge their duty adequately, then it is well with the nation and the people. But if the temple of learning itself becomes a home of narrow bigotry and petty objectives, how then will a nation prosper or a people grow in stature? So that is Nehru talking about two ends of the spectrum. One is the power of the power of universities, or the role of universities in creating new kinds of futures, and the other one is the role of universities and potentially the dystopian role of universities in succumbing to very narrow objectives and so on. So when you look at when you look at institutions of learning, there are a certain kind of social relations that operate within institutions of learning. So there are teachers and there are students, and the teachers have a vested interest in the student's prosperity, in the student achieving learning outcomes. So they are very keen on making sure that the students prosper and the students satisfy their learning outcomes and so on. So this is a key vested interest that the teacher has in the student. And when it comes to generative AI, when generative AI comes into the education space, I'm just here to talk about maybe some of the risks and so on. So forgive me if I'm not talking enough about maybe potentially some of the positive aspects. So when generative AI comes into the space, generative AI is an automation technology, and it doesn't have the same interest in the students' learning outcomes as the teacher has. So this is a very key point of departure, and it might have interest in producing commodified information at a large scale, at a large throughput, but that is not what education is about. And when you look at generative AI, one of the key factors in generative AI is to produce excellent form, excellently written sentences. And many a time when you talk about contentious topics, there are conflicts, there are nuances, there are frictions and so on. And when you ask generative AI about such a layered topic, it will produce an excellent narrator which kind of masks or hides all the friction in there. I mean, it is through understanding the different layers of meanings and the frictions between them that we advance our knowledge. It is about reasoning through those frictions, taking a position on those frictions, and maybe changing the position based on how the teacher tells you about these things. And that is how we advance knowledge. And so frictionless learning is not learning at all. I mean, to me, it is not learning at all. So, and generative AI brings in this engagement, frictionless, seamless, slick way of operation within education, which is very dangerous to me. And one of the other things is that when any student asks a question to generative AI, it will produce the same answer. It doesn't know what the student is. And whereas if, for a teacher, the teacher knows the student. The teacher will answer differently to different students based on their knowledge of the students' understanding of the topic, based on various kinds of knowledge. I mean, how they have interacted in class, how they have scored, and everything. I mean, the teacher knows the student to an extent that the generative AI doesn't know. So generative AI is bringing in this generalization to the space. The same answer is sufficient for every student, which is like a I know there are some personalization kind of related stuff, but personalization is at the level of interaction level personalization. It is not based on the level of understanding that the other person has, that the interlocutor has. That's a different kind of personalization. This personalization is just the generative AI personalization is just to ensure that the person keeps talking to the generative AI. They don't leave it and go. I mean, so it's a different kind of personalization. And another thing that generative AI brings into education institutions is a kind of adversarial relationship between the student and the teacher. The student and the teacher are together, are companions in the learning journey of the student. I mean, that is a key function in education. When it comes to generative AI usage, and I as a teacher here, I mean, when somebody sends in an essay, I'm not sure whether they use their mental faculties or they use generative AI. So I need to hold every essay at a constant level of suspicion as to whether. So, apart from checking the quality of the essay, I need to see whether the essay was produced by generative AI. I need to understand that as well. So I am overloaded because I no longer need to just check the understanding, but also need to check the veracity of the content or whether it is taken from generative AI. And that is one thing that I am overloaded. The other thing is that I hold the student in constant suspicion, and that is not healthy at all. That spoils the nature of relationships within universities. So there is an adversarial relation in the sense, like I'm constantly thinking, is the student cheating me by sending me a generative AI essay? And the student who potentially used the generative AI essay is constantly thinking, is the teacher going to catch me? Because I mean, in the sense, like I've produced some content, and are they going to catch me? So this creates an adversarial, an oppositional, a contradictory relation, a relation of a paradoxical relation, well, whatever you might call it. But essentially, it creates a relation that is not of harmony. It is of disharmony between the student and the teacher. And this is something that we would increasingly see in the future of our education systems. So generative AI, with all its good aspects, maybe there are plenty of good aspects which I have not touched about, but it brings in these kinds of issues with social relation. It has the capability to destroy the social relations that need to exist in academia, that needs to exist in teaching institutions, if we need to envision education institutions in the way Jawaharlal Nehru saw, as places of reason, as places where you want to invent a new future, and so on. So with that, I'll stop. I'll come back to some of these questions if need be. Thank you.